We're Paul and Shanda Johnson. We have been married for 10 years. We got married August 7th, 2011. Right away we knew we wanted to have a family. So we started on that adventure, excited and hopeful, and realized quickly that that wasn't going to be the case. I had been dealing with some health issues since I was 14 years old. I had endometriosis, which caused severe pain and issues with my reproductive health. So we knew starting out that that was going to be an issue, and things kind of spiraled from there. I was seeing doctors trying to help us get pregnant because it wasn't happening on our own. And I was eventually diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome as well. As we were going through that, other issues started to arise. I started having numbness in my arms. I started getting really dizzy. I couldn't walk right. I had a lot of pain in my legs. Things just weren't right. And I went back to different doctors, asked them to do tests. They told me that I was depressed and I was anxious and everything was fine. They wouldn't really run any tests. So we just kept trying to follow our dream of having a family. We set up IVF. We were going to try in June 2017. And a couple weeks before, I lost vision in one of my eyes, and that prompted the doctors to do an MRI, and they diagnosed me with multiple sclerosis. So that 5-year search of mine finally came to a conclusion. I had an answer. Things did not get better, though, unfortunately.
That moment, I feel like, for me, because I wasn't going through the specific health issues, that's when everything switched. And it was day and night. It completely changed, and I had no clue what to do. It was a lot to take in. I mean, we'd handled a lot of other issues over the years. And again, you know, things that didn't affect my personal health or my body, but hers, it was another thing that I couldn't physically do anything about. It's tough. Definitely the hardest things I've done is try and figure out how to help when you can't help.
There were some dark moments, and I remember one morning I woke up before Paul, and I went outside and decided to take a little walk, which was a miracle in itself because I was not really getting out of bed much those days because of pain and honestly depression at that point. And I went on a walk, and it was in March, so it was a little chilly out, but the sun was out, and I remember just feeling a sense of peace. And I talked to God the entire walk, and I just said, God, I don't see what you're doing. I don't understand it. I don't get it. I don't like it. But whatever you bring from this, whatever comes out of this, I'm going to trust you through it. I am going to give all the glory to you because I know that you're going to get me through this and us through this. And I don't know, we didn't know if we would ever have a family. We were starting to try to accept what our life would look like without children. And it's a huge loss of control over your own life. And I just kind of had to give it to God and say, this is yours. I need you to carry this for me because it's too heavy to carry myself. And I don't know how I'm gonna get through this if you don't help me get through this. And I just remember feeling a shift in my heart and in my soul, and like everything was gonna not necessarily be okay, but everything was gonna head in a different direction.
We say give it up to God a lot.
A lot.
we don't force really anything. Whatever decision it is, her health, buying a house, we do things that work, and we give it to God and let Him.
And we know if we're met with resistance, that's God telling us no, and that doesn't mean that He's not giving us what we want. He's giving us what we need, but sometimes it doesn't always look like what we're asking for, and that was a hard realization too, because ultimately I wanted to just say, God, heal me, make me better, take this away from me, please. I don't want this to be my life. But I realized that that's not realistic, and He had something a lot better in store for us that we didn't realize at the time. So one random day, I told Paul he was going to the store, and I was like, you should pick up a pregnancy test. And he was like, okay, I will, which wasn't out of the norm because we'd done this hundreds of times.
We owned stock, I think.
Yeah, we should have owned stock. And he went to the grocery store and he called me about something else, and he was like, I'm on the pregnancy test aisle. Do you still want me to get one? And I was like, no, I can't deal with the heartbreak again. Don't get it. It's fine. And then we continued talking, and I was like, no, go back and get it. Like, let's just be sure. And so he got it, and I sat on it for a couple days because I just wasn't mentally prepared for the negative. And finally, a couple days later, I was like, well, I should probably test. And I did, and it immediately turned positive. And I was like, oh, nope. And I set that down, and I was like, I'll come back to that, because I think my eyes just deceived me. And I let it wait the couple minutes, and I came back and looked, and it was positive, and I just fell to the floor and just sobbed, just ugly cried. But just continued to say, oh my gosh, like this can't be real. This can't, thank you, God. Oh my gosh, I can't. It took my breath away. It was something I never expected to happen. And now we have a 1-year-old little girl named Wyatt, and she is amazing. And I understand now why He made us wait. Good things take a lot of time, and she is perfect. I think she's gonna do a lot of good in this world. I would say don't give up. It can feel so defeating and so heavy, and like giving up is the easiest and only way, but don't, because God is there, and He will meet you in those moments, and He will get you through this. And there is a reason for all of this, and you may not see it and you may not understand it at this moment, but you will, and He'll use your story in whatever way He sees fit. And that's all that I asked Him, is that He could use our story to help other people. And now we're here, and I'm so thankful and so hopeful that we can reach other families that are going through illness or infertility, because it is tough. It is not easy, but He is so good, and He is so faithful, and He will carry you through.
It's been hard a lot, and whether it's me or her, we've always been there for each other. We've expressed this to friends and family, and they've always helped. It's not something you have to go through alone. So.
And it's tough. It's tough on a marriage. It's tough on your soul. But again, you rely on God, and He brought us closer. Our marriage is stronger, and we're in a completely different spot than we were 5 years ago. Our life is completely different, and I give it all to God. I learned how faithful He is, and how loving He is, and how He will find you in your darkest moments. When you think that you are alone and you've been abandoned and you don't know what the point is anymore, He finds you in those moments and lifts you back up and restores you. And I had never experienced something quite that powerful before. And I always, I guess, thought that, like, when I ask God for something, when I pray for something, if He doesn't give it to me, then He doesn't care about me. He doesn't love me. Why doesn't God give me what I'm asking for? And that's not who He is. That's not what He's for. He's not there to give us our every want and desire. And that was a hard realization, because I wanted him so badly to just take it away.
It's God with patience. You can't expect it right away, and that's...
Or at all in certain instances. I
Right.
mean, not to look like exactly what you want it to look like.
It may be an answer in a completely different way.
When I walk through deep waters, I know that you will be with me. When I'm standing in the fire, I will not be overcome. And through the valley of the shadow, oh, I will not fear, for I am not alone. No, I am not alone. You will go before me. You will never leave me. I am not alone. No, I am not alone. You will go before me. You will never leave me. And in the midst of deep sorrow, I see a light is breaking through. The dark of night will not overtake me. I am pressing into you. 'Cause Lord, you fight my every battle, and I will not fear, for I am not alone. No, I am not alone. And you will go before me. You will never leave me. No, I am not alone. Oh, I am not alone. You will go before me. You will never leave me. You amaze me, redeem me, and call me as your own. You amaze me, redeem me, and call me as your own. You amaze me, redeem me, and call me as your own. You amaze me, redeem me, and call me as your own. You're my strength, you're my defender. You're my refuge in the storm. And through these trials, you've always been faithful. You bring healing to my soul, and I am not alone. No, I am not alone. For you will go before me. You will never leave me. And I am not alone. No, I am not alone.
Oh man, I love that song. What an anthem of praise, right? I am not alone. I am not alone. You will go before me. You will never leave me. Love the words to that song. And yet, I think if we're all honest, right, they're simple words. They're easy to say when life is great, right? When life is good, when all feels right in the world, when the sun is out and the birds are singing. And yet to make those statements when life is crashing down around you, though. To actually like stand up as the writer of the song, right? To pledge the truth of those lines when the bottom drops out and when God seems distant and silent. That's a part of the grieving process that feels insurmountable to do that. Right, this process, and there is truly a process to grieving. There's a holy, and I use that word holy really in its term of to be set apart. Right, there's a set apart, holy process of grieving that we've all been called to. And to make that kind of pledge, to make those kind of statements when everything is crumbling around you is so, so hard. And this week, as we're in week 2 of our series here, Wounds to Worship, we're really going to talk about this process. Again, right as coaches say, boy, you need to trust the process. Right out of the gate, I want to say thank you to Paul and Shanda for them sharing really transparently, openly, honestly about their story. I got to tell you, we sat with them for about an hour. And there's so much more to their story, and I know they would both love to sit with you, talk with you. So please, you got questions, they would love to talk to you about it. There's so much more, but we just didn't have the time. And you know, when I reflect on their story, and I've spent a lot of time kind of as we looked at the footage and thought about it over and over again, I think there is a process, and I think sometimes we get stuck in our process of grief. And grief, right, it takes a lot of forms. It doesn't just mean grieving for the loss of someone. That's not just necessarily a death. Maybe that grief is about the loss of a position, loss of a relationship, loss of whatever you were hoping for that didn't work out. And I believe there's a process to that. Again, hearing their story, they had reached a point where they had both found themselves stuck. I think as I heard their story, I think it's part of my story. It's probably part of your story. It's those moments where we get stuck in our grief. We get stuck in our anger, in our confusion, and sometimes stuck in our sense of despair. And then right in the interview there, I think there's a turning point if you caught it there. As Shanda began to tell part of her story, right? There's that turning point when she gets up. She had that rare day where physically she felt capable. Emotionally, she was able to get out of bed and go for that walk. She talks about that March day. And she gets up and she physically moves towards God. And trust me, there were other days she had done that. There were days she shared in the video that we just couldn't share where she would just be laying out right on the floor crying out to God. But this day was different. As she stepped out and she went for that walk, she said immediately she felt a sense of peace. I don't think that's by any accident. I think there's something holy that happens when we physically move towards God into response to whatever we're going through. And so Shanda did that day, and she said, right, she felt a sense of peace. And then it's what she shared after that was so profound to me, and that actually I think reflects what we're going to look at the rest of the morning, this process. It's a process that I see reflected in Shanda and Paul's story, and that we're going to see reflected throughout Scripture as well. As she stood there before the Lord on her walk, and she said, I don't know what you're doing. I don't understand it. I don't like it. Right, anybody else? Oh my word, I have been there. Right, haven't you been on that process? You've been on those walks with the Lord before. Maybe you've been driving your car. I don't know what it looks like, but you're crying out, Lord, I don't know what you're doing. I don't understand it, and I don't like it. And even that, the rawness of that emotion actually is honoring this holy spiritual process that we see replicated throughout Scripture. The truth is there's a lot of literature and studies on the stages and the processes of grief, right? You can go to Amazon, you can go to a bookstore, and there's all kind of literature. It talks about emotionally the stages and the process, mentally, physically. But again, I believe there's a spiritual process and that we must trust the process. Because if we don't, our wounds linger and cut deeper when we interrupt the spiritual process of grief. Let me say that again. Our wounds linger and cut deeper when we interrupt the spiritual process of grief. Now here, I want to say this. This is always my concern a little bit, especially when we get into a subject that's about our wounds, our griefs, our hurts, our pains. My concern is that you come in here on a Sunday morning, maybe you're watching online and you're like, yeah, you're going to give this, right, 3-step plan and I'll listen to the pastor and it's just that easy, right? Do these things and then all of a sudden you're wonderful and life is great. And I don't want to give that kind of message because our wounds are difficult. They're painful. Our grief is oftentimes overwhelming. And I want to make a distinction here. There can be things that are simple, that are straightforward, but still incredibly painful and hard to do. Right? So as we get into this process of grieving, please hear me. Though I think the process in itself is simple and straightforward, simple things do not mean they're always easy. As a guy, right, I've run multiple marathons. I can tell you the process to running a marathon is not complicated, right? It is not rocket science. It's doing this for a lot of hours. It's moving forward. It's not overwhelmingly complicated. But I can also tell you after my first marathon, collapsing in the grass at the end of the race, it is incredibly hard. Simple things can be very, very hard. And I believe there's a pattern of walking through our wounds and grief that jumps out from Scripture. And I think there's these 3 big bucket kind of stages that we have to go through. If we don't go through each one, we will become stuck. I bet several of you in here, I know I've been stuck in some of these processes without going all the way through. I'm sure watching online, you have been stuck. And so you sit clinging to that wound rather than surrendering it in worship. We say stuck in the pain, stuck in the grief rather than trusting the process. And honestly, the process that we see in Scripture, it's really these 3 stages. It's the problem, it's the petition, and it's the pledge. The problem, the petition, and the pledge, right? What is the thing that you're wrestling with? That's your problem. The petition, are you stating very clearly before the Lord, this is what I'm asking you to do? And then regardless of his response, the pledge of faith to trust and praise him no matter the outcome. And we see this pattern repeated throughout Scripture. Here's a couple I want to share with you. This is the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul writes this in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. He says here in verse 7, he says, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me. Verse 8, he says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, Paul says, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Do you see the process there? Paul trusts the process, right? The problem. I was given a thorn. He knows very specifically what it is. And in every step of this process, he goes to where? Does he go to his friends? Does he go to family members? Does he retreat within himself? No, he goes to the Lord in every step of this process. He comes to the Lord. I was given this thorn. And then he comes to the Lord. That's his problem, his petition. He gets very specific. Please take it from me. 3 times he says he cried out his petition. Please, O Lord. And the Lord responded, not how he wanted to. He said, no, Paul, for my power is perfected in your weakness. And then do you see Paul's response, his pledge? So I will now boast all the more in my failings, for when I am weak, he is strong, right? The problem, the petition, and the pledge. We see it actually in Jesus. The night before his crucifixion, Matthew records these lines. Matthew 26, verse 38, right? Jesus, it's the night before the crucifixion. They've had the Last Supper. They've left the upper room. They've gone into the Garden of Gethsemane, a special place for Jesus. And he's decided, I'm going to go kneel before this olive grove and I'm just going to cry out to the Lord. And he says this to the disciples. He says, my soul is very sorrowful, even unto death. And he prayed, saying, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. Again, the process, Jesus modeling this for us, trusting in the process. What's his problem? That he is so sorrowful as unto death. His petition, Father, if there's any way, take this cup from me. And his pledge, not unlike Paul, yet not my will, but yours be done. Then lastly, I want to sit here for a little while because as I think about this process, right, the problem, the petition, and the pledge, I think in Scripture, nobody jumps out and walking through this process more clearly than David, King David of the Old Testament. Right in Psalm 13, we're going to camp out here in Psalm 13. If you got your Bibles, man, pull it out, pull it on your phone, whatever you've got it at. But we're going to be in Psalm 13 because I think this psalm so beautifully and succinctly illustrates this process and David trusting the process of walking through his wounding, of finding freedom in the midst of his grief because he's trusting in this process. So David writes this, Psalm 13, 1-6. He cries out, how long, Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him. And my foes will rejoice when I fall. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. He walks through each of these stages, the process he trusts, right? And this is David. This is David that Scripture tells us is a man after God's own heart, a man selected and anointed by God himself, an imperfect man for sure, but a man who has devoted his life to God and to God's purposes in his life. A man that has time and time again responded in faith when called upon by God. He has fought giants. He's fought armies, and all along he has praised God through it all, yet now he finds himself hiding out and on the run for his very life. Right, I got to believe that David, probably like you and like me, is feeling that sense of going, man, Lord, I know I'm not perfect, but Father, I have committed my life to you. I've tried to do the right thing, Lord. And here I am running for my life, right? He has an enemy pursuing him constantly, day in and day out. And he feels overwhelmed. I don't know what your enemy may be, right? It could be that physical enemy, be emotional, spiritual. I don't know what it is, but here is David, right? And on the surface, it appears that God has removed his favor, that God has gone silent. And so David finds himself, not unlike you and I at these times, right? Frightened, confused, anxious, and feeling overwhelmingly alone. He's on the run. And many scholars will tell you that there's a common belief that Psalm 13 actually is a response to a specific season and time in David's life. He's on the run from King Saul because what had happened, David as a young man, right? God goes and anoints David, the youngest son of Jesse, his father, and says, you will be the new king of Israel. But before he becomes this king of Israel, there's a current king, right? King Saul. And though King Saul started on a good foot and was pursuing God, he turned from the Lord, particularly toward David. And so Saul became a bad man, a man at odds with God and in opposition to his purposes. And he became so intimidated by David's character and his continual success that Saul, as the current reigning king, marshaled the entire resources of the nation of Israel toward one goal, and that was to hunt down, to find, and to kill David. And so David is running for his life day and night, leaving family, leaving friends, leaving every comfort that he'd known, at running again for his life every day. And it's into that moment that he pens this psalm, trusting in the process. He begins with the problem, right? Verses 1 and 2. He says, "How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts, and day after day I've sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me?" Here is his problem. How long? Haven't you felt that? Haven't we all cried that? For David, it's being pursued by Saul. For you and I, maybe it's sickness. How long, Lord? It's loneliness, brokenness. Maybe it's heartache. We've been there, right? We've been in those moments like David where it feels like God has forgotten us, and that maybe he's even stopped seeing us, that he stopped responding, that he's actually covered and veiled from us, right? It says in there, how long will my enemy wrestle over me, right? And how long will you hide your face from me? That he has hidden himself away. Here is his problem. How long, Lord? And then he uses this phrase, how long, right, must I wrestle with my thoughts day after day? And the imagery, it's beautiful of this, and actually it's pretty common. It's this idea, right, that you and I have all been through. It's this idea, right, you go to bed and you're consumed with anxieties, pains, fears, griefs, whatever it is. You finally get a little sleep, and then boom, you wake up about an hour and a half later and you tell yourself, don't think about all those things, don't think. And what do? You start to think. Right, and then the thoughts, they begin to stack upon each other. When he says this, right, how long must I wrestle with my thoughts? It's literally stacking plans and thoughts upon plans and thoughts upon plans and thoughts. They're stacking up on him, and the cycle just keeps repeating itself, and he feels completely overwhelmed by his grief, his anguish, and his affliction. And he cries out, he says, Lord, how long? They will triumph over me, and my enemies will, while I will find myself pressed down. That is his problem, and he has taken it straight to the Lord. Now he moves into his petition, again, trusting in the process here. He gets very specific in his petition. His problem is, how long, O Lord? And now we find his petition. What is he asking for? He gets very specific, verses 3 and 4. Look on me, and answer, Lord, my God. Right, that phrase there, look on me and answer, means really to regard me with favor, with pleasure and care, and to give me a reply, please, Father. David has stated his problem. Now he begins to state his specific petition first. Lord, would you look at me with favor? And then he gets even more specific. Give light to my eyes. Literally, that phrase means to illuminate my path. David isn't necessarily saying, I need you to answer this. I just need to know the direction you're going in. I'm lost in darkness. I feel overwhelmed. Give light to my eyes. Father, illuminate the path in front of me, because if you don't, I will sleep in death. My enemy will overcome me. My foes will rejoice when I fall. He gets specific. Look on me and answer. Give light to my eyes. And then he follows it up. Before God even responds, right, before the answer comes, whether good or bad, whether he agrees with it or not, right, David does this incredible thing. He honors the process. He follows it through. He states his problem, his petition, and he moves into the pledge. Verses 5 and 6, he turns the corner. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. David follows the same pattern that we see Paul repeat, right? Paul states his problem, his petition, please take this thorn, and yet even when Paul doesn't get the response he wants, yet I will praise him. For when I'm weak, then he is strong. Jesus, again, I'm sorrowful unto death. Please take this cup from me, yet not my will, yours be done. Problem, petition, pledge. David pledges, but I trust in your unfailing love. Literally, I am confident of. I have cause to hope. I trust in the refuge of. And again, man, the Hebrew language here is so rich and beautiful. When he's stating this, but I trust in your unfailing love, actually the imagery is that he's literally tucking himself away in the cleft of the rock. Literally, it's this imagery that God has carved out this space in the midst of the chaos, the wounds, and the griefs in David's life, that he's inserting himself into the safest place he knows of. Even though the chaos surrounds him, everything swirls around, yet I will trust, he says, in your unfailing love. And that word unfailing love is chesed. It means his loving kindness, his mercy, his faithfulness, his goodness. He's choosing to believe in it. And he says, and because of that, my heart rejoices in your salvation, right? His pain, his wound, his grief hasn't been removed. In the midst of it, though, he's rejoicing. And rejoice there means to spin around in exuberant joy. He's choosing it. He says, I will sing the Lord's praise. Not just anyone's or anything's. No, this is David's declaration. It's his acknowledgement of the Lord alone's goodness. A goodness that David recognized has been poured out to him even in the midst of his pain, his anguish, his wounding, his suffering, and yes, his grief. So David does. He trusts the process. He models it and he honors it. David, he draws close to the Lord in this, his dark night of the soul. David walks intentionally through the difficult process of his pain that leads him to trust and praise. And yet I got to tell you, man, as you hear any of these stories, you hear Paul's, you hear Jesus' story, David's even, and Paul and Shanda's. Yet you can get stuck if we don't trust the process. When the process of grieving is interrupted, it leaves us trapped in our woundings. It does. I've experienced it in my own life. I watched it in my father. I can remember so vividly. I was in 6th grade when my grandfather died and watching my dad get stuck. He spent 2 weeks in his bedroom and didn't talk to anybody. He just became trapped and stuck in his grief and in his wound. Right? I think you and we can do that if we don't trust the entirety of the process. I think of this process kind of like a water slide. Right? Think about a water slide, you go down to Elitch. Here's the deal. The goal of Elitch, fun is secondary. If you go down to their water slide or you go to Waterworld, whatever, fun is secondary. Their primary goal is to get the paying customer to the bottom of the slide alive. Right? Because an alive customer is a repeat customer. Right? That's ultimately, fun is nice, let's do that, but let's make sure you at least end at the bottom alive. And so picture a water slide. Picture a water slide with 3 different stages. And the point isn't that one stage is more important than the other. If I remove any one of those stages, that customer doesn't end at the bottom. They're injured at best. They're destroyed at worst. For you and I, are we trusting the process, the problem, the petition, and the pledge? Because it only works if it all works together. It only works if it all works together. So I want to ask you, what part of the process have you missed? What part of the process have you become stalled out in? Where is that wound and that grief that you have yet to walk through, that grief that has yet to reach freedom because maybe you're stuck in that process? Is it the problem? Right, we see in all these examples, right? And in Paul and Jesus and David, even in Paul and Shanda, that they all brought them to the Lord. Maybe for you, you've been holding yourself up going, I just got to be strong enough. I got to be quiet. I got to do this thing internally, particularly guys. I see men do this. No, I just got to gut through it. I keep this to myself. And you haven't even brought the problem before the Lord yet. Maybe that's the stage, the process you haven't honored yet. Maybe it's the petition, right? You haven't gotten specific with the Lord. Man, I'm such a fan, such a believer in specific prayer. Why? Because praying specifically gets God's specific glory later. Right? For us to get up in the morning and go, well, you know, God, I just hope I have a good day. You get to the end of the day and you go, was it good? Well, I guess so. It's hard to get any specific glory there. But what if instead we start the day and say, Lord, I want to have an opportunity to speak your love and truth into someone today so that I can give you glory for it by the end of the day. You get to the end of the day, you share with your family, your friends, you go, guess what? I got to share that with somebody. Who gets the glory? God does, because you prayed specifically and he answered specifically. Have you in your wound or in your grief been specific in your petition before the Lord? And then have you turned the corner? No matter the response, have you stated your pledge of faith? You're choosing to believe no matter the outcome. I love this line that Shanda here has. I wrote it here. She's on that walk. And it's before Wyatt comes. It's really before some of the other healings and answers and solutions begin to come in part of their journey in the story, and they're still on that journey. They'd be the first to tell you it's not like every day is rainbows and unicorns. It's not. And yet Shanda makes this statement. She says as she cries out to the Lord, whatever you bring from this, whatever comes out of this, I'm going to trust you through it. I'm going to give all the glory to you because I know you are going to get me through this, us through this. The process, the problem, the petition, and the pledge. I'm going to invite the band to come back up. I'm going to invite all of us to stand. We're going to go to another moment of worship here this morning. And just as we did, week one, we've got this pallet wall that's over here. Now last week, people came and they wrote down, what is that thing that they're surrendering in worship back to the Lord? Today, man, as you go around the room, and again, don't make it weird, man. I think it matters. I think it's insightful that for Shanda, it was getting out of bed and physically moving in response to what the Holy Spirit, to what God was doing in their lives and drawing physically toward them. I think there's a power to that it unlocks some things. It enables us to walk through our wounds and find healing and freedom through our grief when we physically respond. And so this morning, and even if you're watching online, maybe you just need to walk over, grab one of those cards and write, man, it's the problem, boom, and tack it on the wall. Maybe it's the pledge, maybe it's the petition. You can write as little or as much as you like, but I believe there's power in responding physically, practically to what God's doing in us. If you're watching online, to just state that in the comments, as transparently as you want or as privately as you want. If you do that online, know that we've got people here, we've got a pray team. They're going to be praying over you and praying specifically over those things that you share. But here in the room, maybe there's a part of the process you have yet to trust in. Maybe the step, the response is just go over and write it down and put it on that wall and say, God, I'm giving it to you. I'm trusting in this holy process that you will walk me through my wound. You will take my grief and lead me to a place of healing and freedom, because trusting in tragedy and praising in pain is a process that can transform our wounds into worship. Jesus, we thank you for today. Oh, Father, would you speak right now, watching online and here in the room? Would you free us up? Father, for all of us, any of us that are stuck in any one stage, that have yet to move through this entire process, would you speak right now? Would you free us up? Would you help us to respond that we might find that freedom and that healing that you desperately want for us. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.